Welcome everyone. My name's Louisa and I am the nutritionist at the Really Healthy Company who has kindly organised this educational event tonight. We are delighted to have Sophie Tully as our guest speaker. Sophie is a biomedical scientist, nutritionist and health coach. She specialises in helping people with ADHD, chronic fatigue and other complex mental and physical conditions. Tonight, Sophie will be diving into nutritional approaches and products she's used for the last 10 years to help optimise her own brain function and the mental health of her clients. We will have some time for Q&A at the end, so please pop any questions in the chat. So Sophie, a very, very warm welcome. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us tonight.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be sharing my tried and tested insights with you all. And this has been learnt the hard way, a lot of this, years of personal exploration and discovery as well as research. So I actually got into nutrition through mental health. Both my partner and my father at the time, I was a lab research scientist, were both struggling with treatment-resistant chronic depression. And I discovered the wonderful world of nutrition in being able to alleviate some of that. And that's what then ultimately led me to go off and study nutrition. So this is really my kind of baby, if you like. My passion is mental health, brain performance. As Louisa said, I specialise in supporting people with neurodiversity, including ADHD. I have this myself. So optimising brain function and performance is also something that's very close to my heart, as it's something I need to work on a daily basis. So without further ado, let's kick off, because tonight we've got lots to cover. I'm going to be sort of walking through the slides and cherry picking the key information. You will all get a copy of these slides at a later date. There's a lot of information in there. I wanted to give you lots of lovely chunky things to kind of sink your teeth into and refer back to, but I'm not going to be going through all of it in intense detail at this point. So try and stay focused on me and what I'm saying rather than trying to read all of the slides. And like I say, I'll be identifying key bits and bobs for us to discuss. So something that we often tend not to really think about when we're thinking about mental health and brain performance is that in order to optimize how the brain functions and how we think and feel, we need to be thinking about the whole nervous system. So we're going to get to know our nervous system a little bit, recap for many of you, I'm sure, and then we will delve into how to support this from a nutritional perspective. So let's get to know our nervous system. Okay, so I'm sure many of you are aware, or all of you should be aware, that the central nervous system is made up of the brain and then all of the nerves and nerve fibers throughout both the central and peripheral nervous systems. Collectively, these structures work to pick up information coming in. So we're receiving signals and information all day, every day. The central nervous system interprets those signals. So firstly, it detects signals. So that can be anything from a perceived threat in our environment through to obviously putting our hand on a hot hob by accident. That's all information coming in. That information then gets passed and transmitted up our nerve fibers to our brain. The information is interpreted, and then the brain has to quickly send information back down the nerve fibers to wherever it needs to manage a response. And that's what happens. It coordinates a response. So the central nervous system is therefore responsible for facilitating absolutely everything that we do, from picking up our mug to take a sip of our delicious morning coffee, right through to coordinating complex emotional responses and making sure that we're able to cope with stress. So, sorry, bear with me one moment. I'm just going to shut my door. Sorry about that. Right, okay, moving on. So the the way the central nervous system communicates is through neurotransmitters and hormones. Neurotransmitters being the chemicals that are made and stored by the brain and central nervous system, whilst hormones are produced by glands such as the adrenal gland and the thyroid. And the neurotransmitters work alongside hormones to communicate these complex and very intricate responses and reactions. So they need to work together, and we need to then think about supporting and optimizing the function and the synthesis of both neurotransmitters and hormones associated with balancing and optimizing brain function. So the key neurotransmitters are adrenaline, noradrenaline, dopamine, serotonin, GABA, acetylcholine, glutamate, and we have endorphins as well. And they're color-coded on this lovely image slide according to whether they're sort of stimulatory and involved in alertness, or whether they're more calming. And then both glutamate and acetylcholine are in blue because they're kind of neutral. They support learning and memory and day-to-day functions. So just drilling down a little bit into the specific functions. Adrenaline is often the key neurotransmitter associated with the fight or flight. It's essential for increasing our heart rate and our blood flow and making us feel like we have the capacity to deal with things in our environment. So we need some adrenaline being produced every day to make sure that we have the get up and go, if you like, to actually get things done. Noradrenaline is involved in blood vessel contraction. So that increases the amount of blood that's flowing around the body. If the space in our blood vessels is smaller, the blood is pumping faster around the body. And that has a direct positive impact on attention and brain function, because it increases the amount of blood that's flowing past the brain, which means the nutrients and oxygen that are in our blood is increased. Dopamine is not always closely considered when we think about mental health and brain function, but it's absolutely vital. We tend to just think of dopamine as our kind of pleasure reward neurotransmitter, but actually it's so essential for focus, attention, motivation, because without that sense of reward that we get from engaging in activities, we don't want to do anything else. So it's really, really important and plays a really important role in how the brain functions and how able we are to get things done. We're all very familiar with both serotonin and probably GABA, because we're told time and time and again that these are our baseline neurotransmitters for mental health and well-being. And that's because they absolutely are. If you have an inadequate supply of either, you're going to struggle to relax, you're going to be out of kilter emotionally, you're going to struggle with happiness and sleep. But both GABA and serotonin, again, are important for coordination and important for focus and memory and things like that as well, and minimizing stress activation and anxiety associated with that. So it's really important that when we're thinking about nutritional approaches for balancing and boosting the brain, that we are aware of the specific nutrients and neurotransmitters that they are contributing towards creating, and then the actions that they have in the brain and the body. So there's a little link there for those of you that would wish to recap in depth how neurotransmitters work. But as you can see from both of these diagrams, you've got the end of a nerve axon here, and then that's the synaptic space, and then you've got the start of the next nerve fiber here. And what you can see, this arrow represents an action potential. So an action potential is like an electrical signal, electrical impulse, as I'm sure you're all aware. And that then signals to specific sacs known as vesicles, containing specific neurotransmitters that the brain wants the ongoing response to release. So whether it's dopamine, serotonin, GABA, or adrenaline, the specific nerve stimuli will cause a release of the just realized my slide wasn't working. So I'm looking at this diagram here of our lovely neurotransmitters and how they work. So this is your nerve axon terminal, and you've got your vesicles of neurotransmitter here, and upon the relevant electrical signal, the relevant neurotransmitter gets released and picked up, which again, I'm sure you're all very well aware of this. But the point I need to make here, or the point I want to make with this slide, is that there's a lot of factors that we need to consider in terms of making sure that this whole process is functioning optimally. We obviously need to make sure that the central nervous system and the receptors are healthy, that we've got enough of the right types of neurotransmitter available, and that we've also got the correct electrical signals coming along the nerve fiber. So when it comes to neurotransmitters and making sure that the brain is in an optimal state of functioning, it's all about balance. Neurotransmitters, despite what we tend to think from a lot of our reading and our learnings, they don't work in isolation. It's not a case of noradrenaline just doing this one thing on its own and being responsible for that wholly. They work together, as you can see from this diagram. So whilst dopamine is important for motivation and reward, it's also really important for working memory and alertness. Whereas noradrenaline, norepinephrine, is important for concentration and being able to execute, get things done. So you need dopamine to give you the motivation, but then you need enough noradrenaline to actually be able to do the thing. And then you can see that dopamine and noradrenaline work together for memory. So you've got working memory and recall memory being derived from different neurotransmitter functions, and together that motivation to get things done, the ability to execute things, and then the physical activity of memory being recalled, she says, I can't recall the word for recall, you end up with this overall ability to sustain focus and attention. And then similarly, in relation to serotonin, we've got learning memory. So without serotonin, and we don't generally associate serotonin with memory, but you need serotonin to actually learn new things and to enjoy the process of learning new things. Otherwise, you won't enjoy that, and it won't happen. You won't form the memories. And if haven't got enough serotonin, you won't have that sense of satisfaction from things that you're doing. You'll feel restless and anxious and unable to be in a calm, relaxed, open-minded state. So together, these neurotransmitters are really important. They need to be balanced. They need to be in harmony if we want to optimize brain function and if we want to minimize negative impacts of stress and the delights of all of the things that have been going on in the world around us for the last year and a half. So something that I find really beneficial with clients in my clinic is doing a neurotransmitter inventory. And that's why I've provided this slide for you. So too often we just assume that depression or low mental health is associated with low serotonin, or that an inability to focus and concentrate is associated with a lack of dopamine, for example. But if you look at this table, you can see there's actually a lot of crossover. So it's a really useful tool to just take stock. So when you're working with somebody, you're going through your case histories, it's useful to cross-refer a lot of these other symptoms, so things like tingling, shortness of breath, nausea, vomiting, even low libido, tremor, all those sorts of things, to just give you a really comprehensive underpinning of which neurotransmitters are likely to be implicated in your client's brain and mental health issues. Without that clear idea of which neurotransmitters you're directly dealing with, you can end up kind of going on this long journey of scattergun approach and not really making the progress that you want to. So that's just hopefully a really useful chart for you to delve into those case histories and gain a really clear perspective of what you're dealing with. The other thing that is increasingly on the radar, and it's one of my huge passions, is genetics. So I'm not going to delve into genetics in depth today. If that's something people are interested in, maybe I could do a more genetic focused workshop at a later date. But genetics is so important, as I'm sure you're all very well aware, because our genetics drive our functionality and our physiology, and the world around us heavily influences our genetics. But when it comes to neurotransmitters specifically, I do a lot of genetic analysis in my clinic, and a lot of that is specifically for clients with brain function and mental health conditions. And I see increasingly that the profile of genetic alterations for what seem like the same conditions and the same potential symptoms, as you can see here, what's actually going on at a genetic perspective is a lot more complex and a lot more diverse from person to person. So even though we're all expressing similar top level kind of diagnostic criteria, if you like, what's going on at a biological level can actually be quite different. So this is a flow chart, a schematic from the wonderful Seeking Health, which is Dr. Ben Lynch's education, what's the word I'm looking for? Educational setup, let's call it, educational behind the scenes. And obviously he has his supplement range as well, but Ben Lynch, we know and love him for his wonderful insights into MTHFR and, of course, nutrigenomics. And this diagram just gives us a really interesting understanding of what's going on right at a biological genetic level from a mental health perspective. So it looks complicated. It's not that complicated. I'm going to try and take you through it a little bit. So if you imagine this is a funnel, sort of starting at the top, this is a schema that then goes down this way, and the arrows have got little, the lines have got little arrows, so you know which direction we're going in. So coming in here would be through to create BH4 and provide these amino acid building blocks. We've got folate and we've got protein from our diets. So the first thing that we identify here is that at the top of this diagram, the initial building blocks and the key first step for creating neurotransmitters is having those amino acid building blocks. What then happens is these building blocks are converted into precursors with the help of BH4, which we've just identified comes from the folate cycle and folate. So BH4 together with iron then creates tyrosine, L-DOPA, and 5-HTP. Tyrosine further goes on to be turned into L-DOPA also, and L-DOPA becomes dopamine. Dopamine can then become norepinephrine, which becomes epinephrine. And all of these other lines are just different routes in which those products can be either made or metabolized. Everything in a bubble represents a gene. So similarly here, we've got tryptophan being turned into 5-HTP and ultimately being turned into serotonin and then melatonin. So just having a basic understanding of what's going on at this fundamental genetic level can again be really helpful when thinking, where do I start from a clinical perspective? So if you go back to this table and you've identified what you think might be going on, whether it's high or it's low, specific neurotransmitters, you can then look at supporting the genes involved in the production of those neurotransmitters with the key nutrients. So everything in green on this diagram is a nutrient cofactor for that specific gene. So again, we can see here, we need BH4 and iron to turn our amino acids into their neurotransmitter precursors. Then for dopamine, we need vitamin C, copper, and a sexy little nutrient that I'm going to be talking about later, known as PQQ. For the metabolism of dopamine, we need SAMe, which derives from the methylation cycle, and we need magnesium. For healthy, happy serotonin and melatonin, we need B vitamins, and B vitamins feature heavily as cofactors for genetics. So I just wanted to show you that diagram because, as I say, it's useful to just have an awareness of what's going on at a genetic level so that when you're drilling down into the specifics for your client, you can put in some basic nutritional strategies without needing to do an in-depth genetic analysis. You can still have a positive impact on how the genes are functioning related directly to the neurotransmitters involved in your client's individual clinical profile. I'm going to be referring back to specific elements of this diagram later, so that's part of the reason why I wanted to show you as well. Okay, so we now understand the key components of the central nervous system. We understand the neurotransmitters, how they directly relate to how the brain works and how we feel and mood regulation. So what do we need to do from a nutritional perspective to look after our central nervous system and make sure that it's functioning at its best? Well, as I've touched on already, there's a few key steps to doing this. We need to provide the building blocks for a healthy brain and nerves. We then need to provide the building blocks and the nutrient cofactors for neurotransmitter synthesis and function. We also need to look after the genes involved in the synthesis of these neurochemicals. And then finally, we need to protect against wear and tear, which I will go into a little bit more in a moment. So, how do we utilize the power of nutrition in protecting and promoting optimal brain health? Well, the very first thing we need to think about, So my presentation is doing a weird thing. So I've got kind of two split screens and they're not matching up. Okay, so this is how we look after our central nervous system. My apologies. This was the genes that we were talking about here. So I think you saw those. So these were the amino acid building blocks, the precursors to the neurotransmitters, and then the genetic process of creating the downstream neurotransmitters. And we'll go through this in more depth. The green is the cofactors, the nutrient cofactors that we need to be thinking about. Then when we want to look after our nervous system, we've got to provide the building blocks for healthy structural components, as well as supporting neurotransmitter and gene function and preventing wear and tear. So the power of nutrition in promoting optimal brain function, we need to start with the structural components, as I say. So I'm sure you're all very well aware of this, but the central nervous system is predominantly lipids, predominantly fats. If you were to take the brain out of your head, which I don't recommend, and dehydrate it in the sun, like a sun-dried tomato, 60% of what is left of the brain will be a dehydrated, fatty, gelatinous blob. And that is composed of a specific mixture of saturated fats monounsaturated fats and both the polyunsaturated omega-3 and 6 families in particular. Now, it's important to just really highlight that, because whilst we are all aware, it's something that often gets overlooked. We think, oh yeah, if you're just eating a range of fat-rich foods, that's okay. But with people increasingly choosing to go down a plant predominant diet route, it's important to do an inventory and make sure that the diversity of fats within the diet is optimized. If people are completely vegan, then it's very, very easy to end up with a central nervous system that's out of balance. By default, a plant-based diet is going to be higher in omega-6 than it is in omega-3, and it can tend towards being lower in high-quality saturated fats. Similarly, if people are eating an animal-rich diet, if they're not eating high quality, so sort of pasture-reared, grass-fed, organic animal fats, then the quality of the fats that we're providing the central nervous system and the brain will also not be optimal. So whilst it seems like, yes, of course, Sophie, we know this, it's something that can be easily overlooked when starting to think about an optimal brain healthy approach from a nutritional perspective. It is really important to tick all of the boxes. So if somebody has a low saturated fat and a low cholesterol intake, for example, then their white matter is going to struggle, and white matter is rich in the nerve axons of the nerve fibers. So it's all very well and good saying, oh yeah, eat loads of nuts and seeds, but if you're not ticking those boxes for healthy saturated and monounsaturated fatty acids as well, then your central nervous system is going to start to struggle. And we know from a scientific perspective that the foods that we eat directly influence the structure of the brain and the central nervous system. So just to really hammer that message home, it's a really good place to start. Whether you want to do a dietary analysis or you actually want to do a fatty acid profile test to identify the balance. So Igenis Healthcare Nutrition, I was going to pop this in the slides and then I didn't get around to it. My apologies. I'll put a link in the chat for everybody later. But Igenis Healthcare Nutrition do an Opti-O3 fatty acid test, as I think Thriver do, and there's a couple of others as well. But Igenis actually give you a full breakdown of the fatty acid structure of the red blood cells. So it gives you everything, the balance of saturated, mono and polyunsaturated fats, not just the omega-3 to 6 ratio, which a lot of companies will just do. And that can help you identify if certain diets that people are following are too low in the key structural components for the brain and nerves. Okay, moving on to neurotransmitters. So we touched on this already, but we now know that the neurotransmitter building blocks are proteins. So we need a diverse range of proteins to ensure that we're ticking all of those boxes for those amino acid building blocks. And again, this is where we tend to get carried away. We tend to get so excited with supplementation and targeted nutrient interventions that we often overlook those fundamentals of making sure that the diet has adequate and diverse proteins. So if somebody only ever eats chicken, for example, and that's their only key source of protein, are they neglecting other areas? And similarly with plant-based diets, making sure that there's enough diversity to tick all of those boxes and make sure that you're getting a protein complete, essential protein complete diet, which is easier said than done sometimes. So serotonin derived directly from tryptophan, dopamine from tyrosine, which comes from phenylalanine, and glutamate from glutamine But beyond just proteins, when we're thinking about synthesizing neurotransmitters, we also need to think about specific nutrients. So choline, unsurprisingly, is essential for acetylcholine. And again, from a vegetarian perspective, that might be something that you might want to drill in on. It's a great option as a supplement for cognitive function, brain performance, focus, and attention. Particularly if people aren't regularly consuming eggs and salmon and fish and things like liver as well are all good sources of choline. So that's a good thing to kind of be aware of, and again, often overlooked. Another thing that tends to get overlooked when it comes to general central nervous system health is the need for energy. So as nutritionists, we tend to get a lot of people that want to change their body composition or lose weight or just generally kind of be a little bit healthier. And a lot of people, in order to do that, like to diet. And one of the key kind of health messages out there is to avoid sugars, but we actually need glucose in some form in the diet to derive the acetyl group that's made, that we make acetylcholine out of. So if you are not supplying the body with sufficient carbohydrates relative to that individual's needs, it can ultimately end up being detrimental. So just something to be aware of there. And then finally, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit, but gut bacteria are directly responsible for producing GABA. And as that nice colourful slide with all of the neurotransmitter told us, GABA is essential for making us feel calm, relaxed, switch off. It has natural sedative effects. So we want happy, healthy guts feeding on fiber-rich foods in order to produce GABA. And as so many of us are aware from our clinical experiences and probably personal experiences, there are a lot of people out there that have struggles with specific fiber-rich foods. We see a lot of bloating, digestive discomfort. So if people are seeing digestive issues alongside mental health issues, anxiety, poor sleep quality, inability to relax, then GABA might be the first thing that you want to kind of hone in on and see if you can optimize. Okay, so we touched on this, but just to really reiterate that the building blocks alone are only going to get you so far. As with everything from a biochemistry perspective, there is a cofactor for every enzyme, and you need an enzyme for every reaction. And cofactors are almost always, if not always, a nutrient. So for optimal central nervous system function and neurotransmitter synthesis, and by default, therefore, brain function and mental health, we need plenty of iron. And we tend to overlook iron as an important neurotransmitter for as an important nutrient for neurotransmitter synthesis, because we tend to only think of it as being related to fatigue or important for kind of childhood development. But as you saw in that genetic schema, just whiz back to remind us, iron is the first cofactor involved in converting amino acids into the neurotransmitter cofactors. So if people are not eating an iron-rich diet or a bioavailable iron-rich diet, then this immediately sets people up to be in a difficult position in terms of making sure that they feel their best. So it's an important one to address, predominantly from foods where possible. It's really common, and I see it more and more and more in my clinic, however, in women, but also in people with chronic, persistent, either brain performance or mental health issues, that a little bit of iron taken on a fairly regular basis can boost the brain and mental well-being. So just, again, one to kind of highlight, because it's often one that we tend to overlook. Then we've got B6, really important for the central nervous system, and in particular the synthesis of dopamine and serotonin. And vitamin C, massively important for mental health, and in the formation of both dopamine and adrenaline. And then we've talked about B vitamins already, but B vitamins are super, super duper for brain and central nervous system. So this is just another visual representation of how important nutrition is at the individual steps of creating those neurotransmitters and making sure that you're functional. So again, when you're thinking back to your clients or your own individual neurotransmitter profiles and how your symptoms might correlate with high or low levels, that will then give you a route into the nutrients involved in each of those. And it's a little bit more detailed than the slides I've provided to you before. Here's the link to a really interesting article where I pinched this image from, if you want to read up on that further. But as you can see here, B vitamins, folate, zinc, magnesium, calcium, vitamin C, copper, and iron are the key nutrients that will support a healthy, happy central nervous system from a baseline perspective. So then moving on from that, the other vital thing that tends to get overlooked is action potentials. We talked about the purpose of action potentials in terms of sending that electrical impulse down the nerve fiber to then signal to which sac vesicle full of the specific neurotransmitter to pass on to the next nerve terminal. This requires electrolytes in the form of potassium, sodium, calcium, magnesium, and chloride. So if your calcium levels are low, which I see increasingly commonly in my clients with chronic stress, it's not that they're not eating enough calcium per se, it's that they're maybe not choosing the most bioavailable sources and then they're not absorbing it. So calcium is really important from a central nervous system perspective, as is the balance between potassium and sodium, as you can see here. So that electrical impulse that passes down every nerve fiber requires a specific balance between sodium and potassium. And interestingly, I'm finding increasingly that people aren't consuming enough sodium, and I'm sure many of you are as well. We've been so brainwashed over the last few years to be afraid of salt. Salt's going to give you hypertension, that sodium levels tend to be too low. So something like a good electrolyte solution, pinch of sea salt in your glass of water, or a Soleil, for example, Soleil solution, where you saturate water in a high quality sea salt or Himalayan salt first thing in the morning, is a great way of just quickly injecting all of those electrolytes back into the body so that you're setting off the day in the right balance. And then we did briefly kind of touch on glucose already, but energy. Your central nervous system, particularly when you're under stress, sucks up so much energy. Your brain uses 20% at least of energy of the whole body across the day. And the more you're using your brain, the more stress and pressure your brain is under, the more energy it's going to need. And the brain loves glucose. So I hate to say it because I'm sure lots of people will be like, oh no, I can't believe she's saying that. But it is counterintuitive to be restricting carbohydrate and healthy sources of glucose. By this, I mean fruits and natural sugars when somebody is going through a period of intense mental strain, let's call it. So it's a balancing act, and there's actually been quite a lot of research into the link between glucose consumption and stress, and how restricting glucose foods or sugar containing foods can detrimentally impact both brain performance and stress resilience. So I'm not saying go forth and eat jelly babies, although they're better than some sources of glucose, but I am saying that some healthy, natural, and regular exposure to glucose containing foods can actually be a really positive thing from a brain performance and stress resilience perspective. Okay, so I'm sure you're all very well aware of this, and you can come back to this in your own time, but this is my optimal brain and mental health shopping list from which to build a brain-friendly meal. So then the next thing we want to consider is looking after our brains from a wear and tear perspective. And by wear and tear, I mean stress. We are all under stress all the time. And this last year has been particularly stressful. I don't know about you, but I have found just the constant threat and the not knowing and the changes and the toing and froing and not being sure whether you're coming or going really quite difficult to manage, and it has taken a massive toll on my brain function. So we need to find out ways of being more stress resilient. Now, something again that we tend to overlook, and just to reiterate the point about glucose, is the hormonal way that we regulate stress is to produce cortisol from the adrenal glands. And the main purpose of cortisol is to provide a steady stream of blood sugars to give us the energy to cope with stress. And that's a really, really important thing to be aware of, is that we all perceive stress differently. But as it says on this slide, stress is the biological response to encountering a threat that we feel we do not have the resources to deal with. So we tend to just jump on suppressing stress and preventing cortisol and minimizing our exposure to stress and cortisol. But stress is inevitable. And if we know we're going to be regularly exposed to stress, the best way to be stress resilient is to make sure that you have the resources available. That includes having sufficient blood sugars, as well as all of the nutrients involved in the synthesis of hormones and neurotransmitters. If you're getting your resources right, if you're providing the building blocks and the energy, and you're getting sufficient rest to repair and recover from stress, then you should be in this lovely balance. Human beings need a certain level of stress in their day-to-day lives in order to actually get anything done. So when we're under mild stress, mild pressure, positive stress, or eustress, if you like, we have sustained focus and attention. We feel empowered, we feel rational, we're clear-minded, we're emotionally balanced. If we don't have enough stimuli, which was the case for a lot of people during lockdown, obviously there's nowhere to go, there's nothing to do, you may be on furlough or made redundant, then that's going to dip you into an inactivated form of distress. But similarly, when this gets too much, when the stress becomes too much relative to your resource pool, we then also end up in distress. And the longer that happens, the more likely you are to become forgetful. Your brain becomes sluggish, your mind becomes slow, your emotions become imbalanced, you become disorganized, dysregulated, and ultimately you can burn out. So I'm sure many of you have seen similar graphs to this before, but this is just a graphical representation of the physiological response to acute stress or actual stress. So what we're doing, bumbling along, having a lovely time, everything's super duper, and then all of a sudden the news comes on and we hear that there's this horrible, nasty virus that is in our environment and it's killing people quickly. So we go from 0 to 100, cortisol, adrenaline pumping through our veins, blood glucose elevated, blood vessels restricted. We're in hyper alert mode and we're in ready for action mode. Now, normally we would make a decision, we would deal with the consequences, and we would then feel completely wiped out and exhausted as a result of that action, have a little rest, and gradually return back to that nice steady state. However, either when that stressor is non-deal withable, or if it's recurrent, so it's every day, you're watching the news every day, it's getting worse, things are changing, the more exposed to those stressful stimuli, the less and less easy it is to return back down to baseline. And over time, this baseline will actually get higher and higher and higher. So even if your stress becomes null and void, or your stressor is no longer there, the level at which you can return to baseline is significantly detrimentally impacted, meaning it takes a lot less to put you back up in this high level of stress activation. And that's something I'm sure we're all very familiar with. But the longer that persists, the more likely we are to then suffer the consequences of chronic distress and chronic unmanageable stress. And this is what we see in our clients. I am sorry if you've had to experience a lot of this yourself as a result of long-term stress. I know I certainly have. So these are all signs and symptoms to look out for, and understanding that physiological underpinning of stress will help you to be aware that maybe it's the stress and the mental health and the central nervous system that we need to address first before worrying about more targeted interventions for these individual symptoms. So over time, the more you are in the alarm and resistance phase and the more chronic stress you're exposed to, the less and less easy it is to return to homeostasis, and eventually you'll become completely burnt out, frazzled and exhausted, which I think a lot of people have felt over the last year. This is a lovely little quote by the fabulous Hans Selye, who I did my master's dissertation on his work, all about the link between stress and how the body responds to stress from a physiological perspective. Okay, so deep breath, that's the chunky, sciencey, central nervous system stuff out the way. So what I'm going to do is just go through and identify some key nutrients that I have found for myself and for my clients to be of particular use in optimizing the central nervous system, making sure that the brain can function at its best, and minimize the potential long-term impact of exposures to chronic stress. And I'm just going to cherry pick a few of the products that are available from the Really Healthy Company as well, that I particularly love because of their wonderful profiles. So magnesium, 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 magnesium. I cannot say that word to you enough. Throw everything you think you know about magnesium dosages out the window and just go with what works for the individual. I have found with some clients, I need to go 3, 4, 5 times the sort of recommended 360 milligrams of magnesium. You will know when you've overdone it because they will start to have an upset stomach. But magnesium is vital in combating stress exposure. Magnesium gets depleted rapidly when we're constantly under stress, but we also need magnesium to trigger GABA receptors and to help keep the central nervous system, and in particular the HPA axis. Oh, goodness me. I'm so sorry, people. My slides are really not playing ball. Right. I'm going to have to whiz through again. So protecting against wear and tear. Here is the stress response. Terrified. Okay. Cortisol gets liberated. The purpose of cortisol is to create steady stream of sugar and energy so that we can fight the stress, basically. When we are in eustress, positive stress, as humans, we feel awesome, we're functional, we can get loads done, and we feel on top of the world. But not enough stimuli or too much stimuli causes us to dip into distress, and this is not what we want. The longer you are in a chronic threat exposure state or chronically activated from a stress response perspective, the more you're going to get stuck up here, and the harder and harder it is to come back down to baseline, meaning that over time, this baseline moves closer and closer and closer to the stress activation state. So it takes less and less to actually be triggered. So over time, we experience a huge number of symptoms associated with chronic stress when chronic stress is the root of the problem. So Hans Selye, as I said, my focus for my master's dissertation on stress and its physical impact. Over time, the more stress we're exposed to, the more likely we are to end up in this exhausted, burnt out, frazzled phase. And that takes a lot of effort and energy to claw back from. So magnesium, as I was saying, magnesium, super important from a GABA perspective and a relaxation perspective, and helping to prevent the overactivation of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which we saw in that diagram earlier. If your HPA axis is in that kind of hyperactivated, stuck in a stress sort of state up here, then the more magnesium you can give to calm that down, boost GABA receptor activation, the better. And as I mentioned, magnesium, it's a very safe mineral to take. Excuse me, sorry. Very safe mineral to take. And generally, it's about the individual need. So I tend to suggest 200 milligrams 2 to 3 times daily as a starting point in people who are chronically stressed, particularly if they have sleep problems. And magnesium is associated with waking up in the night rather than struggling to fall asleep. So if people are chronically stressed, suffer with anxiety, and have sleep-related issues where they're waking up, then high doses of magnesium. Also, I just popped in here, which I'm sure you all know, but there's multiple things in our natural or unnatural, potentially, environments that further use up magnesium in their processing. So just be aware that coffee, alcohol, sugar, they're all things that many of us use to dampen the stress response and cope with stress, but they will further contribute to the levels of magnesium that are necessary. So I popped this product in here. This is a Premier Research Labs product. It's a lovely product in powder form, and I love powder products for things like magnesium because they're really easy to fiddle around with the dosages. You can just do sort of 1 scoop, 2 scoop, quarter of a teaspoon, half a teaspoon, so you can titrate that dose really simply and easily. This product in particular is a lovely watermelon flavored, naturally sweet product, and it provides 400 milligrams of magnesium in a really easily to absorb, so highly bioavailable form. Calcium, we've touched on already, very important for sending those central nervous system signals. Calcium is actually the mineral that allows neurotransmitter vesicles to synthesize with the nerve axon. So if you don't have enough calcium, you're not going to be sending signals around the central nervous system efficiently. Again, I popped in this product. This is a calcium magnesium mineral balance, and it's a marine derived source. And marine calcium is one of the most lovely bioavailable versions of calcium you can possibly get. And I popped this in for diets that you might identify as being low in calcium, or if you feel that people are having calcium depleted symptoms. So things like weakness, fatigue, as well as general kind of mental health and well-being symptoms are associated with low calcium. So it could be useful to try in the short term a really lovely kind of highly bioavailable calcium supplement like this to just see if that can overcome some of the chronic stress symptoms that you experience. Vitamin C we saw as a really important cofactor, but vitamin C is also essential for looking after the adrenal glands. And if we want to make sure that we have the resources available to cope with stress efficiently, we need to be providing the building blocks to make cortisol and keep the adrenal glands happy. So vitamin C is depleted at such a rapid rate during chemical, emotional, or physical stress. So high doses of vitamin C can be a really effective, very, very safe and very simple way of boosting stress resilience and combating some of the side effects associated with that. So again, lovely product there, all natural, bioflavonoid derived, combining lots of wonderful ingredients like rose hips as natural sources of vitamin C to help provide the body with non-synthetic and super absorbable forms of vitamin C. B vitamins, it goes without saying, we all know how vitally important and wonderful B vitamins are for energy, mental health. We've seen their role directly in nerve transmission and neurotransmitter functioning at a genetic level. But all of the B vitamins play a fundamental role in making sure that our central nervous system can function at its best. And as you can see from this diagram here, and I'm sure you're all perfectly aware of this, but just to highlight, certain B vitamins, in particular B12, B6, it can be hard to get enough of those on a purely plant-based diet. So it's important to be again, analysing and assessing those fundamentals before we jump into the advanced strategies for central nervous system health. Are you ticking all the boxes? Are people getting those fundamental nutrients? Excuse moi. So this is the wonderful Premier Research Labs vitamin B complex. And I'll leave you to have a look at that in your own time. But it's a food-derived, food state methylated liquid B complex, which again can be really lovely for a lot of people that are sensitive or need very kind of specific dosages or have suboptimal digestive function. So we touched on the vital importance of fatty acids for brain structure, but I'm sure many of you are aware of the key role of omega-3s in preventing inflammation and also promoting optimal mental health. So there is an abundance of research, including lots of very clear now systematic reviews and meta-analyses that show that omega-3s directly correlate with optimal mental health and well-being. And omega-3 is actually a very effective, in the right dose, treatment for otherwise treatment-resistant depression. It can be really helpful for depression as well. Again, with people going increasingly plant-based, the lovely Premier DHA, which is a plant-sourced DHA, vegan, healthy alternative to fish oil, provides DHA in a decent dosage, which DHA is the main omega-3 that forms the structural component of the brain. So if people are struggling with focus, attention, memory in particular, DHA is a great omega-3 to focus in on. So if you are not eating fish and you're not eating other kind of pre-formed omega-3 sources, then supplying the body with DHA is a good option and a necessary option. This is just a little study you can see here in the chart on the side, healthy brains versus depressed brains. And this looks at the polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fatty acid breakdown of the subjects in this study. And you can see here in the healthy subjects, DHA is higher than in depressed subjects. EPA plus DHA, which is known as the omega-3 index, is also much higher. And as well as the ratios of omega-3 to omega-6 in the form of arachidonic acid. So from my years of research, and I used to work for a company who specialized in omega-3s and inflammatory-based nutrition, pre-formed EPA and DHA is really, really essential for mental health, brain function, and optimal emotional kind of resilience. So, as I said, if you are eating a fish-free diet, it's important to find a good pre-formed DHA and EPA where possible source, such as this one, to supplement the diet with. And then lastly, on the kind of essential nutrients is vitamin D. We've not talked about vitamin D yet, but vitamin D is commonly overlooked from a brain and mental health perspective. But vitamin D is essential for calcium metabolism, as we know. And as we know, without calcium, there is no neurotransmission. So optimizing vitamin D and obviously identifying whether vitamin K is necessary for individuals alongside the vitamin D to ensure calcium is absorbed and utilized effectively is a great starting point for making sure that the central nervous system can function. Vitamin D also plays a direct role in protecting neurons against oxidative stress and promoting neuroplasticity, new neuronal growth and development. So it's a really key thing, which I'm sure we all have on our radars anyway, but just to highlight its role in cognitive function. And deficiency of vitamin D in the research has been consistently linked to both depression and cognitive decline, so reduced cognitive function. So optimizing vitamin D status could be a quick and easy way of helping to boost brain function and performance. So now we come on to the more sort of targeted or niche or specific interventions. And I've got just a few products as well as some interesting studies to highlight, and then we'll move on to questions. So I can never say this, Louisa might have to help me later, but the Klamath, I think that's right, Klamath blue-green algae. I'm dyslexic as well as ADHD, so I can't read and I can't spell. So Klamath organic blue-green algae. This has revolutionized my life. I've started taking it fairly recently and I absolutely love it. It's a really good option if you want a food-based, natural, very diverse kind of all-round health and wellness product to just add to your daily intake. The lovely thing about it is that it contains an absolute plethora of health-enhancing vitamins, minerals. It's got all of the important amino acids in optimal levels relative to the quantity that you'd be taking, a massive diverse mineral profile, including good levels of, calcium. I thought I've chopped off calcium. I didn't mean to. I purposefully meant to put calcium in here, but it's got really good levels of calcium. It's got good levels of magnesium, great levels of molybdenum, which are also really important for kind of liver health and keeping everything in balance in the brain. So from just a general sort of providing all of the necessary vitamins, minerals, and amino acids that support the central nervous system, the blue-green algae is absolutely wonderful, but there's more. Ooh, exciting. So the other wonderful thing from a mental health and brain function perspective about this algae is that it's a source of phenylethylamine, shortened usually to PEA. And many of you might have started to hear about PEA or have it on your radar as a good product. And it's naturally in this blue-green algae, and research shows that it's associated with increasing feel-good hormones and also boosting brain function. So it actually has a really similar role in the central nervous system as medications like Adderall or Ritalin. It boosts supports the focus and attention and motivation of the brain, and is associated with increasing serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, and acetylcholine, which is all very exciting. So you can see here on this diagram that PEA is derived directly from phenylalanine. Now, until fairly recently, I don't think people were really aware of its existence, but as you can see from this on the side, it's really wonderful in terms of mood stabilization, optimizing brain function, and generally supporting overall brain and mental health balance. But too much of a good thing is not a good thing, which is why the blue-green algae is wonderful, because it's at a really lovely kind of low level that just adds to the natural biochemistry that your body and brain should be carrying out anyway. Just giving you that gentle top up alongside all of those lovely minerals and vitamins that will act as cofactors to support the downstream metabolism. So it's fantastic. And from a research perspective, the algae has been shown to be beneficial for attention deficit disorder, so ADHD. It's also been shown to be beneficial in depression in postmenopausal women, so helpful for people who have hormone dysregulation, which could be either a consequence or a cause of emotional and mental health and brain performance issues. So some really lovely positive research out there, and really clear benefits to the PEA contained in the green algae. So mood balance, again, improves moods, reduces depression. There have been articles published which describe PEA as an immediate shot of happiness, pleasure, and emotional well-being. You're not going to get that necessarily from the algae straight away because of that nice, gentle, low-level amount, but it's still a wonderful component of the blue-green algae. And as you can see, deficits in PEA have been directly correlated with depression and other psychological disorders. So it's definitely something to consider in terms of regulating mental health in particular. So PEA, in this study here, sustained antidepressant effects from a PEA supplement. So it's lovely. I'm obsessed with it. Okay, so moving on then to the brain-gut axis. And I'm not going to delve into this too deeply because I'm sure you're all acutely aware of the vital connection between our gut and our brain. But as you know, they're constantly talking to each other all the time through both neurons. We know the gut has its own central nervous system, and that sends messages back to the brain, but also through neurotransmitters. So the gut produces neurotransmitters as well, and those neurotransmitters contribute to the central nervous system function. Short chain fatty acids as well that are made by gut bacteria have direct influences on the brain. And also inflammation derived from lipopolysaccharides, which we know come from toxins from bacteria in the digestive tract. If that's left to run riot, this can negatively influence the brain, lead to inflammatory-based mental health issues and depression as well. So there have been tons and tons of studies linking digestive function to vagal tone. So you can see here on this slide that studies found that people with IBS or Crohn's had reduced vagal tone. And the vagus nerve is this huge nerve that runs, as you can see from the diagram here, all the way from the face and down the side of the neck, around the lungs and the heart, and wraps around the digestive system. So IBS and long-term chronic and even severe inflammatory digestive issues are associated with this brain-gut axis link, the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve, we know, plays a really important role in our stress resilience, and as many people experience, when we're under stress, our digestive system becomes very unhappy. So looking after the vagus nerve is a vital tool in balancing the brain-gut axis, but it's also the same with neurotransmitters. So most of our serotonin, or a lot of our serotonin, is produced in the gut. As we touched on already, we need happy, healthy gut bacteria that are munching on fiber to produce adequate levels of GABA. And without that, we can see depression-like behaviors. We see this in research studies, and we know that a healthy gut producing GABA keeps us happy. So there have been studies looking at probiotics, and this was a really interesting study directly relating to kind of emotional bias and stress. And when we're stuck in the state that we're in at the moment, where we're chronically activated and we're always scanning our horizon, waiting for the next Boris announcement that's going to throw our lives into disarray, we want to find solutions and strategies to make us less bias towards the negativity, which is a natural human thing anyway. It's a survival technique. But research shows that prebiotics and probiotics, or in this research in particular, prebiotic supplementation was actually able to shift people's attention towards more positive information. That in itself is fantastic. Just to know that looking after your gut bacteria, feeding your digestive tract with lovely foods and nutrients that it can thrive on, is going to make you overall more geared towards absorbing positive information. That's fantastic. So with that in mind, there's a couple of products in the Really Healthy Company catalogue that are fantastic for looking after the digestive tract. Now, we tend to think predominantly of prebiotics and probiotics as prebiotic powders and then probiotics dehydrated bugs, but the Really Healthy Company have Micromax, and Micromax is wonderful. I didn't even know it existed until fairly recently, and then Louisa told me all about it. I was like, oh my God, Louisa, this sounds amazing. Basically, it's this magical liquid that completely reconditions the gut microbes. So it's got microbes in it, safe, healthy microbes, a broad array of bacteria, yeasts, fungi that are all positive and enhance the microbiota environment. But it's also got loads of lovely herbs. It helps to support with removal and purification of the digestive tract. It acts as a probiotic, and it's just simply lovely. So I strongly recommend that people invest a bit of time and effort in researching that and seeing if it's something that they might want to add to their repertoire. So it's naturally fermented, and it works by reconditioning the gut environment and making it more harmonious and happy over time. The other wonderful product from a digestive perspective, which often doesn't get talked about from a digestive perspective, is BioBran. So BioBran has been on my radar for many, 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 many years, ever since I did a specialist qualification in nutrition for cancer. But BioBran is touted predominantly for its cancer therapy supportive mechanisms, but it's because of its structure, because it's a rice bran, it's wonderful for the digestive tract as well. And as you can see from these studies here, BioBran has been used very, very effectively in treating IBS, so reducing inflammation and also minimizing IBS, both diarrhea and mixed type irritable bowel symptoms. So here, 40 patients were given BioBran or a placebo, and the efficacy was assessed after 4 weeks. So 4 weeks is a really nice short intervention time to actually see a good benefit. 63 versus 30%, 63% of the BioBran group versus 30% of the placebo group saw significant reduced IBS symptoms as well as inflammatory markers in the digestive tract after just 4 weeks. That's amazing. Definitely a very good reason to get on the BioBran bandwagon. As a consequence of that, BioBran has also been shown to directly positively influence health-related quality of life this was in older adults, healthy older adults. So even in people who already think that they're healthy and well, BioBran has a positive influence on overall physical, mental well-being, but also on ratings of things like pain and vitality, as well as social functioning, which is amazing, I think, to have a supplement that can make you feel like you're more functional and able to socialize effectively, which harbors connection, which boosts mental well-being and overall quality of life, is just wonderful. So there's several different options in the BioBran range. Explore those, one of which contains vitamin D, so you don't need to take that one separately, and that one's particularly good for immune system as well. And given that the immune system has been under constant threat for the last 1.5 years, BioBran, it seems to me that this is sort of a must-have on most people's optimal wellness supplement list at the moment. It has really potent, powerful, immune supportive and strengthening benefits. So for anybody that feels that they need to be shielding or they're at high risk, this is a great one, regardless of sort of brain function and mental health and gut function. But if you've got all of those things going on, then definitely go for some BioBran. Okay, so I wanted to just highlight curcumin, because curcumin is an absolutely fabulous nutrient, and this product contains long vida curcumin. So I'm sure most of you are aware of the positive benefits of curcumin. Curcumin is potently anti-inflammatory, and that is really wonderful for mental health as well as gut health. Recent research has also shown that curcumin can be really beneficial for people with sleep disorders. And I came across some, I couldn't annoyingly find the study when I was writing this. So the studies that you can see here are all looking at sleep deprivation and sort of memory impairments and things in rats. But there was a study that I was emailed about the other day in adults, human adults, that showed that curcumin was also beneficial from a sleep quality perspective. Now, this product is really lovely, as I mentioned, because it contains long vida curcumin, and long vida curcumin is one of the only curcumins in the world that I'm aware of that delivers active free form curcumin directly to the brain. So you can see that in this lovely picture here. Free curcumin is the form that has been associated with a lot of the cognitive benefits and the benefits to sort of Alzheimer's and neurological damage and cognitive decline and things like that. So it's the only form I'm aware of that gets it actually into the brain and active in the brain, where it's able to perform its brain enhancing benefits. So how does curcumin do this? Well, usually tryptophan is used to make 5-HTP, and that via serotonin gets used to make melatonin and serotonin. But when we have inflammation in the body, curcumin actually, when we have inflammation in the body, tryptophan gets diverted via this alternative route. So it no longer goes down here as much. It gets diverted via this gene, IDO, and gets used to make kynurenine and ultimately quinolinic acid, which is a neuroexcitatory chemical. And that can cause a lot of negative health implications, particularly mental health issues. And it's why inflammation is so heavily associated with a lot of stress and mental health issues today. But curcumin, as I skipped ahead and ruined the punchline, is able to very efficiently block that inflammatory process and make sure that tryptophan continues to work down this route, making serotonin, keeping you happy and positive and optimized from a mental perspective, and also then providing the resources to make melatonin to promote optimal sleep. So again, just another couple of really lovely studies there. Curcumin also plays a really important role in keeping the gut healthy. Curcumin has been wonderful in research for chronic digestive inflammatory conditions, but it's been shown here as well. Curcumin metabolites can provide benefit by restoring dysbiosis, which is fantastic. And then you can see here that curcumin is also directly related to reducing neuroinflammation, protecting neurons, supporting the health and integrity of the cells of the brain, as well as throughout the central nervous system. So a wonderful, very targeted, very potent and very beneficial nutrient to include in a more intensive kind of brain and mental health support protocol. So just a couple more things to really quickly touch on for those that are interested in, again, slightly more targeted approach. So a lot of people under chronic stress end up with fatigue, and PQQ is an absolutely fantastic nutrient for supporting central nervous system and brain health, as well as minimizing fatigue associated with long-term chronic stress. PQQ is similar to CoQ10, but not the same. And essentially, one of the main benefits of PQQ is that it encourages mitochondrial biogenesis, and anything that does that is top of my list in terms of good things. One of the things I love about this product is the blend. So you've got CoQ10 for energy support, you've got PQQ for mitochondrial biogenesis support, you've got calcium for general central nervous system support, and then you've got this lovely phytomarine support blend, which is lots of lovely antioxidants and medicinal mushrooms, for example, a bit of algae in there as well, to generally look after energy and cellular health. Now, research has also shown that PQQ has direct benefits to brain performance and focus and attention, and that's down to this fantastic little gene that, when it's working, is really important. So DBH stands for dopamine beta hydroxylase, and that converts dopamine into norepinephrine, which, as we saw earlier, is necessary for energy, focus, concentration, as well as overall mental well-being. So PQQ is the cofactor for that reaction. And so supplementing with PQQ can be really beneficial from, as I say, energy perspective, mental performance, focus, clarity, all those sorts of things, and overall well-being. And then just some lovely studies there showing that PQQ is directly capable of increasing blood flow to the brain, which by default is going to help to support optimal brain function. So yeah, lovely nutrients. And then just to finish up, two other ones that I just wanted to highlight: this fabulous antioxidant complex. Antioxidants vitally important for the brain. The brain is under constant threat from oxidative stress, being lipid rich. Lipids are usually the first thing that oxidative stress degrades and damages. So soaking your brain in this lovely, diverse phytonutrient antioxidant complex is a really wonderful, just additional kind of approach to looking after the brain and making sure that oxidative stress impact is minimized as much as possible. That's just a breakdown of all of the lovely ingredients. You've got some blue-green algae in there, yes, a bit of curcumin, so lots of great things for keeping that brain happy. And then just finally, this adaptogen, I just wanted to pop in there because both rhodiola and cordyceps in particular, from my own personal experience, have been really, really powerful in terms of combating, again, that intense exhaustion associated with chronic stress activation. So just, yeah, as I say, another lovely blend, this one from Premier Research Labs, that gives a comprehensive support for the central nervous system in those people that find that exhaustion, fatigue-based stress symptoms is the problem. And I've rabbited on for far too long. I hope people can stay for a few questions. I'll let Louisa come back.
Hi, Sophie, that was incredible. Such a lovely level of information. We all really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Good, you're most welcome.
So we've got a few questions. I think the first one was, do you think a chronic dry mouth can be due to stress?
Absolutely, yes, very much so. A lot of the time, so chronic dry mouth, it can be down to fatty acid imbalance, but also down to electrolyte imbalance as well. So they would be sort of my starting points to identify, is there a good balance? Because although it seems counterintuitive to think with fats for dry mouth, but if you haven't got the right fatty acid balance in all of the cells that line the oral and esophageal and gastrointestinal tract, then the lubrication is not going to be possible. And then similarly, if your electrolyte balance is off, that's also going to make you feel sort of chronically thirsty. The other thing as well with stress is that we are using up our electrolytes at a lot quicker rate, so that will affect our overall fluid balance. And if we're dehydrated on any level, that's going to start to dry out mucous membranes and make us feel crispy, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. So someone was asked, when you were talking about the magnesium levels, someone was asking, is it okay to take high levels of magnesium if you're on blood pressure tablets?
It depends on the type of magnesium. I would suggest it's always worth checking directly with the product manufacturer on that one. Each product will have different guidelines depending on the dosage. Magnesium is a complicated arena these days, in which you get some that are food state, some that are triple reacted, some that are optimally bioavailable. So it's usually safe. I would suggest with any high dose, in inverted commas, intervention, that you always break it down into smaller doses at regular intervals. Magnesium in particular is better absorbed and utilized by the body if you have smaller amounts. So I think I mentioned when I was talking about magnesium, taking around about 200 to 300 milligrams 3 or 4 times a day. So you've got like one with each meal, one with dinner. But please check with individual product manufacturers because it will vary.
Perfect. Someone else here was asking, would someone with a leaky gut or poor metabolism still benefit the same from the supplements to boost mental health? And apart from the loose stools or taking too much magnesium, are there any known side effects? That's a double. Yeah.
Yeah, double question. So leaky gut and digestive issues is always a complex one because, automatically you're thinking, are they going to be absorbing? That's why liquids and powders tend to be a good option. What I find with people with kind of persistent digestive issues is smaller doses of things more regularly, so that you're giving the body maximum exposure, but without overwhelming any particular absorption process or pathway at any given point. Obviously, if you're using those lovely products to optimize the microbiome environment and keep the digestive system happy, then that is a great start in terms of regulating things. The second half of the question about known side effects, was that specifically in relation to
too much magnesium?
Too much magnesium. So obviously people who are already kind of diarrhea prone, digestive issues, then you want to go easy with magnesium. Now, that being said, because of the different natures of magnesium, you may find that you can do high doses of magnesium if you're using different sources. So it's really only magnesium citrate, magnesium oxide that in high doses are associated with significant increase in bowel movements. So finding a product that sort of bypasses the digestive absorption to some extent, or uses different mechanisms that doesn't irritate the stomach, can help you overcome that. And usually I try, as I say, to use products or use a few different products that utilize different magnesium uptake systems, so you're not overwhelming any one at any given point.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Sophie. So we're kind of aware that we've come up to the 7:30 mark, and there's a few more questions, but they're more kind of product focused. So if it's okay with everyone, I will answer those questions individually, because they're about finding the supplements in the US and what have you. So we can get back to you all on that if that's okay. So we'd love to thank you again. It's been really insightful. And if there's anything else you'd like to add, Sophie?
I would just say, I'm quickly looking through. There was a question from Lizzie Rayner. If Lizzie, you could email me directly, I will happily have a chat with you about that, because it's probably going to be a bit more than just a quick answer at the end of a webinar. Yes. Definitely get that definitely get in touch with me. It's quite specific.
Absolutely. Lovely.
Perfect. All right.
Super. Well, have a lovely evening. Thanks so much again.
Thank you very much for having me, and have a lovely evening, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.